Hi there.
Did it work?
It worked.
Good.
Here we go.
All right. All right. Should we just begin?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Eric, thank you so much for participating with us today, and welcome to Plein Air Painters Chicago. I Heart Plein Air. It's our annual educational event. I've already introduced you using your bio from your website from ericrhoads.com, and I have told our participants here at I Heart Plein Air all about you. So we're delighted that you're able to join us today. We're sorry you aren't able to be with us in person, but
So am
we
I.
so appreciate everything about the time that you've given us.
I'm happy to do it. So I grew up in the Chicagoland area, and so Chicago holds a very special place in my heart. I actually grew up in Indiana, but Indiana was heavily influenced by Chicago. We listened to the local Chicago radio stations, WLS and WCFL, and some of those from the past, and WGN, of course. And I was telling somebody the other day when I was 13, I said to my mom I wanted to go Christmas shopping. And so she put my best friend and I on the train to Chicago back when there was one. And at 13, we went to Chicago, went to that part of town that wasn't very delightful at the time. I don't know what it's like now. And walked into the loop, did our Christmas shopping, waited till dark, walked back to the train, caught the train at 8 o'clock at night or something. Something that certainly wouldn't happen today.
Yeah, that's not likely. That's right. And actually, we've got 60 people here, and some are from Indiana. We have people here from Wisconsin, and of course also Illinois.
Outstanding.
So you are represented here.
Well, I went to school in Chicago at North Park College over at North Park in Kedzie for a very brief period of time. I didn't stay very long, but I discovered my passion and quit school and went into radio.
You'll be interested to know we're doing a paint out over by North Park this summer. It's at the North Park Village Nature Center, and that's one of our places. They have a beautiful 40 acres that we'll be painting at, and I'm excited because there'll be beehives there. So come join us, and you can see your own pond.
Well, I might do that one day. I need to get back to the Midwest and do some painting. I've got a lot of farms in Indiana that I've been dreaming about painting. And I love Chicago. I've never painted in Chicago. I've been there many times, but never painted. So I think it'd be fun.
Well, at this meeting, we're actually announcing all the locations, and we'll send you the list, and maybe you can find one to come and be with us.
That'd be nice. I'd like that very much. Thank you.
I'd love to hear a little bit more about your background, and also maybe just from a little bit of fanness. We know that Plein Air magazine actually makes us real. Just having a magazine about what we do, and so thank you for that.
I think you're real anyway.
It's probably true, but being able to see it and being able to really discuss it, and I can't think of many meetings or times that we're together over a coffee or beer or whatever, and just somebody brings up the magazine. So just generally, just thank you for that.
No, thank you. It all happened kind of by accident. I don't know if you ever heard the story. Well, what happened is my wife bought me a painting lesson for my 40th birthday. I had painted when I was a child. My mom always had paints out, and she was a painter. And so I played with paint a lot as a kid, mostly acrylic paint. And then I started taking it up in my late 30s. I started painting from photographs, and I was having a struggling time, and I mentioned it to my wife, and she said, well, I bought you lessons for your 40th birthday. So I went in, and the guy said, okay, here's what you do. You take the paint and you throw it across the canvas. You just express yourself. And he was teaching abstract, and it just wasn't my thing. And I said, well, I don't know exactly what to call it, but I'd like to learn how to paint like a bottle or a flower or something else. And he said, well, that's just like, nobody does that anymore. That's old school stuff. And you'll just never make it as a painter. I said, I don't care if I make it as a painter. I want to learn how to paint real things. And he said, well, you're in the wrong class for that. And so I quit the class. I still have the painting I did in the class, but it kind of sits in the garage. And so I was kind of lost. I didn't know where to go. I was kind of not wanting to go to like the YMCA or something because I was afraid. I'm not degrading that, but I didn't want to get a bad instructor. And so I was stuck in a taxi cab for an hour one day coming back from Miami. And this guy, the cab driver, was an artist. I wish I knew his name. I'd like to thank him. He changed my life. And he told me about this guy in West Palm Beach where I was living. And he said this guy, his name was Jack Jackson. He said he studied in the lineage of Jerome. And he said he's the real deal. He'll teach you the right way to paint. And so I went to his class. I waited a year. I was so intimidated. I waited a year. And then I went to his class one Saturday morning, and I walked in, and there were about probably 10 or 12 people in there painting. Most of them were women. And they were all doing copies of old masters. And I looked around the room, and everything was, in my untrained eye, was really beautiful. So I looked around, I turned around, and I walked out because I was convinced I couldn't do that. And fortunately, the guy caught me out of the corner of his eye, and he called me back in, and I told him that I didn't think I could do it. And he said, well, if you'll give me 18 months, you can do what they're doing. He said, it's not easy, but you can do it. And he said, we're going to get started right now. He was smart. He just grabbed me and put me on an assignment. And he pulled out, he said, okay, pick out a photograph. And he said, you know, here's 5 or 6 to choose from. And they were Mapplethorpe photographs, black and white. And so I picked one. He said, okay, we're going to make a painting of that, and we're going to start that today. So he put me down, and he showed me how to do a grid system so I could grid the painting and then transfer it to a canvas. And then he started showing me how to paint it. And he got me hooked right away, which is the right thing to do. And so I came back, and, you know, I studied with him for about 4 years. And so that changed my life. But we were copying Bouguereau's. And sorry, this is a long story. We were copying Bouguereau paintings, and I was on a business trip, went to San Francisco to the Palace of the Fine Arts, and I saw my first Bouguereau painting for the very first time in person, this big, massive painting of this young peasant girl with a jar. And the jar stood for that she still had her virginity intact. If it was a broken jar, she had lost her virginity. And I didn't know that at the time. I know it now. But anyway, so I stood there in front of that painting, Mary, and I wept because after learning to paint and struggling and realizing that this man had every vein, and you could see every vein in those hands and the muscles, and I realized that to accomplish that, it had to be a Herculean effort. And so I stood there and wept. Anyway, I kept painting. And we moved to San Francisco. I founded a .com out there. And so I was painting nights and weekends and trying to stay in touch with my instructor, Jack. And anyway, he died. Long story there. But my wife came to me one day. She said, well, I'm pregnant, and I'm pregnant with triplets. And she said, and the smell of paint is just driving me nuts. You got to get the paint out of the house. And so I moved. We were in the back bedroom with the paints. So I moved them to the garage, and I tried that. And she said, no, I can still smell it. So I had to paint. And she said, look, you might as well just give up painting because you're going to be raising triplets. You're not going to have time for painting. And I said, I'll find a way. I have to paint. It's in my blood. And so we lived on a golf course. So I took a card table and a chair and a big box of gear and my big studio easel and a big canvas, and I set it up out on the edge of the golf course where there was nobody golfing, and we had this beautiful view. And I tried to paint the view in person, and it was, of course, a disaster. The canvas kept flying off the easel. You know, there were bugs. It was not a good experience. I did not know the term plein air painting, but this was my only option. My only chance to paint was to paint outside where the smell wasn't in the house. So I tried it 2 or 3 times, and I really failed at it. And so I went to, we saw a thing in the paper, and it said something about a plein air painting festival or something like that. I didn't know what it was, but we went, and it was all these people who were painting outside, and this was near San Francisco. And we bought a painting, bought our first painting there, still have it hanging here in my office. And I met some painters for the first time, and this one painter by the name of Kevin Corder said to me, you have to do 100 paintings. Go buy 100 small 8x10 panels and do 100 paintings before you even try to take any instruction, and just get used to it. And he said that'll help you a lot. So I did that. And then I started finding some instructors and so on. So I thought, because I was running into a couple hundred people who were plein air painting, I thought this was a movement. And I make my living as a magazine publisher. And so I started Plein Air magazine for this movement. What I didn't realize at the time is the movement really didn't exist. And there wasn't much plein air painting going on at all. There were probably not more than 200 or 300 people in the country that were doing it. And so it got a rocky start.
About what time was this? What date?
Well, I would say probably my kids were born in 2002. So it was sometime around then, maybe 2001. I don't know the exact time. Actually, I have the first issue. I can go look.
Okay, good. This is helpful. I had a similar experience in terms of just seeing two people in the back of a pickup truck painting in Taos, New Mexico.
Really? What a place.
Seeing them painting and thinking to myself, I want to do that. And I had no idea how to paint, and didn't have a pickup truck. But
Well, none of us did know how to paint, and you know, that's why it's so important to help people along and give them encouragement, because they get discouraged real easily. And I've met so many people who started and then gave up. I don't have the first issue. I have the first reissue issue. And so this was in spring of 2011. So what happened is I ran the magazine for a couple of years, and the advertisers would say to me, I went to the paint materials people, and they said, nobody paints in plein air. We can't, it's too narrow. We'll never sell anything. And so they wouldn't advertise. And the galleries said, we don't carry plein air paintings. Plein air paintings are unfinished paintings. We won't advertise with you. And I couldn't survive on subscribers alone. And though I got up to, I don't know, I think about 10,000 subscribers, there was no advertising money, so I couldn't make it. So I switched the magazine. I closed down Plein Air, sent out a letter, apologized, and it really broke my heart because it was really something I was passionate about. But I didn't want to go bankrupt. And so I changed it to Fine Art Connoisseur magazine. And then when I changed it, advertisers came on board. It wasn't easy. It didn't happen overnight, but it was a little easier. And so Fine Art Connoisseur has been published since then. And then in 2011, which is about, 8 years ago or so, people had been sending me emails and bring it back. And I thought, well, I've got a little more meat on my bones now. Maybe I can make it. And so I brought it back, and the timing was right. The movement was a little stronger. The advertisers were a little more interested. And the thing that made the difference is when we brought it back, we announced the Plein Air Convention, which was the first time anything like that had been done for plein air anyway. And so we brought some vendors there, and we gave them a really good deal. And, you know, they were all very skeptical. But we're trying to get them to advertise with us. And everybody that was there sold out everything they had. And, you know, we only had, I think, maybe 250 or 300 people the first time we did it. And some of them shipped more stuff in, and they sold that. And they became rabid fans. And I was just yesterday at the NAMPTA, which is National Art Materials Convention. And they're rabid fans now. They're loving the whole plein air movement because people are going outside and they're consuming a lot of product, right? They're painting a lot of panels and they're buying a lot of paint, and they, of course, like that. So it's a big change from when we started.
So you would call it a movement at this point?
Yeah, I would call it a movement. Jean Stern, who is the curator and director of the Irvine Museum at the University of California, who is probably the most prominent person who has been tracking the whole plein air thing going on. He's a historian and so on. And he said there are more people painting in plein air than any art movement in the history of art. You know, there were small groups of plein air painters in America in different places, and there still are, you know, but back then, you know, Monet and his group were doing it in France, and then you had the people that were doing the Laguna people, the Taos painters. You had the painters in Connecticut, and I'm failing to remember the name. And there was the Hoosier Salon down in Brown County in Indiana, and you know there were little pockets of small groups of painters, but this is a large group of painters. And when he comes to the convention, he comes every year. He always talks about, he said, this is a special period of time. He said that we have people who, 8 years ago when he came to the first convention, he said, there are people at this convention today who are virtually unknown. And he said, I'm seeing painters out here that are pretty good. He says, I'm going to watch them for years and years and see what happens. And now some of those people are some of the, you know, the top masters in our field and our teaching at the convention. So it's really had a huge impact on I think on the movement. You know, the goal is to keep it alive. The goal is that this isn't something that is short-lived. It's something that, you know, it's a lifestyle. You guys all know the lifestyle, but, you know, it provides us with a challenge. It keeps our brains active and flexible, and, you know, you can paint till the day you dropped. I was writing an editorial for the magazine today about some painters that I know that painted in their wheelchair till they were 100 years old, till they died. And, you know, so it keeps us young, challenged. It's very social. You guys are all painting together, which is really a lot of fun. And of course, it also, for some of us, it provides a little extra income. I'm in a gallery. I sell a little bit of art, and some of my friends are retired, and, you know, they sell a little bit of art, but, you know, an extra $500 or $1,000 a month matters. And then, you know, a lot of them are turning it into a career. And so, you know, I want to keep this alive. I want to not only keep it alive for the boomers who are in the market, which is a big part of it because they have the time and the money, but also for the young people. I want to get more young people painting and get more 20 and 30-year-olds in there. We've offered a special discount to the convention to the students at the Academy of Art University in San Francisco to come, because we want to make sure that we're fueling this movement for the future.
We have a student fee as well for our membership. I'd love to unpack a couple of the things that you've been talking about, because they are things that people said that they were interested in learning more about. Well, one comment I want to make is that, you know, we are here at the Palette and Chisel, which has been around for more than 100 years, and talk about the, you know, the place to find the probably some of the best instructors.
Oh, yeah.
And get the fundamentals and some of the basics. So I think we're all very grateful for the Palette and Chisel support, for one thing, at the Plein Air Painter Chicago, and they have been supporting us for several years now. But also that there's not a better place to go where you can count on the teachers. In the group here today, we have a couple of your teachers as well, the people, your instructors for PACE, Nancy King-Mertz, Joe Geiersack, I think are two of the people that are here. Bill Schneider is one of our regular members. So you know, I'm sure many of those folks. And one of the things that I would like to know about, because also in this group right now, we do go across probably from, well, we've had teens and all the way into, I know at least 80s. I don't know if they're even 90 now. So we really cross all the decades in terms of people that are participating and coming out with us and being our guest artists at some of those ages. I'm interested in how you see what that career could be. We do have a lot of people who come to this, myself included, as a boomer, and now thinking, in fact, getting a little upset when somebody on the streets and says to me, "My, that's a nice hobby you have." It's like, wow, hobby. I've spent more money on paints and brushes than I did on my undergrad. You know, so you know, it's sort of like, when does this turn from a hobby, and what can be expected as you? What is your thought about that for us that are kind of coming to this mid-career, midlife?
Well, I'm not sure I have a quick and easy answer for you. I wish I did. I did a video. I taught at the Plein Air convention. I teach marketing 3 mornings in a row there for an hour and a half each. And one year I did basically a thing that was kind of targeted towards pre-retirement boomers and retired boomers, and how to ramp up a career really fast, because a lot of people say, well, I don't have 30 years to do this. So I think there's not an easy answer. Marketing is like anything else, or I shouldn't really say marketing. You have to look at, if you want to be selling your artwork, whether you're looking at it as a part-time thing to sell, a couple of paintings a month or a painting a month or just a little supplemental income, or whether you're looking at it as building it as a career, it's a business. You're a small business person. And, artists tend to bristle at that idea. They get the hair back up on their necks, on the back of their necks up, because, they're artists because they kind of wanted to get away from their careers or their business, or maybe they just never wanted to be in business. And yet you mentioned people like Nancy King Mertz or Bill Schneider. I mean, both of these people are great examples of people who have turned it into a great business as well. I don't know about Nancy's background. I think she's been an artist forever, but she's a great business person. And then Bill had another business, and now he applies his business principles to his art, and he sells, I think, probably quite a bit of art. But he's very good as being on the other side as a publisher of a magazine. I know who's sending me press releases and who's not, and I get more press releases from Bill Schneider than any painter on earth. Every time, it seems like every month or every week, I'm getting a press release about an award that he's won, and he doesn't need to. He's already proven, but he enters every award, every salon, because it gives him something to talk about, gives him something for his resume. It gives the gallery something to talk about that says, hey, this person is an award winner. And, you need stories.
And if we were cutting to that piece of sort of your advice for us, is that something that are competitions and online competitions and salons, are they important?
Well, I do one, so of course I'm going to say they're important. But the reason I do it is because I felt like I needed something that was serving the plein air community, but also showing that the plein air community is broader than plein air. There's this, I'll answer your question in a roundabout way, but there's this sense that plein air is a means to an end. And, I get calls, I get emails, still get letters. I got a letter the other day. I couldn't believe I actually got a letter. And people get up in arms about their definitions of plein air. I have purists who will say, and I'm not saying any of this is wrong or right. I have purists who will say a plein air painting is not a true plein air painting unless it's done on location and never touched up afterwards, and only in one sitting. I have others who say it's not a plein air painting unless it's been through 2 or 3 sittings. There's every variation on it, and then you've got others who say plein air is not meant to be sold or shown. It's meant to give you color notes and shapes and forms so you can do a studio painting. And I think the answer to this, from my perspective, is plein air should be what you want it to be for you, not what anybody else expects of you. And if that's what you want it to be, then that's what it should be. But and the reason I bring that up, because in our thing we do plein air salon, if you study history and you study the history of plein air painting was not all about landscapes. It was also about figures. It was about architecture. It was basically painting from life. The Russians, as part of their academic process, even to this day, they make their students, after being in classes all winter, they make them spend all summer painting figures in the landscape in natural sunlight, because that's part of their perception of the plein air process. as a result, in our competition, we have plein air lives, we have still lifes, and we have figures, and we have portraits, and they're all supposed to be rooted in plein air. They're supposed to have been started from life, and you know, plein air is typically outdoors, but not always. I mean, you know, I've stood inside in a window in the winter because I don't want to freeze to death and painted a scene. Is that not plein air painting? I don't know. It's.
Well, I have a couple just comments I'd like to make. One is that we have guest artists 1 to 2 times a month that come out when we do paint outs. So Bill Schneider is going to do one of his as a guest artist. He's going to do a demo, and we've hired a model to be able to work with us and to talk about, just as you're talking about, figures in the landscape. So, and Bill Schneider is going to do that for us. The other thing, I'd just like to go back to, actually, I think I want you to settle an argument for us, that it comes up every single time, the debate that you were just talking about what the definition, you know, what constitutes plein air, but that it really, I think what it really surfaces is that when paintings aren't equal in our exhibits, so when someone comes in with something that's obviously been used as notes, or, you know, they were out with us with the plein air and then came back to their studio and maybe even did a completely other painting, and then with people that did their paintings out in the field, maybe, you know, 90% or so. And we're trying to figure that out. Do you have any advice for us in terms of coming down on, we basically want good paintings, but how to kind of make people feel fair, I guess, that we've been fair about that. So you have advice for the plein air painters in Chicago exhibit committee?
Well, I don't know that I want to take on any politics. I hate politics. You know, my favorite thing to do when I go to a museum, and I go to Europe once a year, and I go to the museums. We take a group of art collectors every year. The first thing I do when I go to the museum is I seek out the plein air studies. And I remember being in a museum I think it was in Germany, and I found this wall of plein air studies, and they were tiny little, you know, 6x8s or 8x10s that were just big, juicy, thick brush strokes of color. They were done rapidly. They were implemented rapidly. You could tell they were grabbing the light and color. And if I could have afforded any painting in that museum, I would have afforded that wall of those little plein air studies, because to me, they spoke to me more than the finished works. And yet other people, you know, I'd bring other people over and they'd look at them and they'd kind of glaze over and go, you know, you're crazy, you know, but look at that beautiful finished painting over there. I mean, the nice thing about art, the beautiful thing about art, and this is always the great debate, is that, you know, art is a personal thing. That I think that the reason we do jurying is because we do want to adhere to standards of helping people get to levels of development. The reason that all the shows, most of the shows have jurors, is to keep the underdeveloped paintings out. And, you know, that's always a tough thing, because somebody might look at a very experienced plein air painter who does simple brush strokes as a study and say those are underdeveloped. And so that, you know, that's why it's good to have 2 or 3 judges in these kind of scenarios. But, you know, that when I first started painting, to me, I wanted paintings that looked almost photographic. And today, one of the things I struggle with is my wife will come into my studio and she says it doesn't look anything like the photograph or like the painting. And I said, yeah, I don't care about that anymore, because I'm just trying to express myself and find a way that you know, communicates something or tells a story. You know, so I'm moving trees and I'm moving clouds and I'm inventing light, and you know, I'm doing a lot of things, and I very rarely even use photographs anymore. I like to use studies that I've done. I have hundreds of studies I've done that I want to turn into studio paintings. And the only reason is I won't sell my studies because they're precious to me. To me, they're my life's work, and I want to do a book of them or something, not for anybody else, just for myself. But the idea is that, you know, I can go into my studio and look at my studies, which I have, like Winston Churchill, you know, I've got all around just filling up all the walls. And to me, those are my memories. I can remember when I painted that piece and a deer jumped in front, you know, and or a coyote or a rattlesnake, or, you know, or ran into a person and talked to a person. I remember all those things when I see those paintings. So I don't want to give those up. I don't want to sell them. And so I think you're getting, I think that you know, what you've got to do is you've got to vet out quality, because there are people who are not yet developed who need to be able to raise to a level of quality. And it doesn't necessarily mean a standard of tightness or a standard of looseness, but it is a standard of quality. You know, and everybody needs to kind of pull themselves up. And I used to get frustrated because nobody would ever vote on anything I ever put in. And I thought it was good, but I couldn't see that it wasn't. Other people with experience can see that it wasn't.
Thank you for that. And let me just also jump on something else that you just said there. I know that you've painted with many famous artists. Do you have any quick memories of any that have just really made an impression on you?
Oh boy. I don't know that I can. I'll think about that for a second. The thing that has been the hardest to overcome, though, is it's pretty intimidating when you're standing next to C.W. Mundy or Joe McGurl or Don Demers or anyone really, Catherine Statz. You know, these are brilliant painters, and the thing that I found is that I was painting differently when I was around them, because I was trying to perform for them. I was trying too hard, and as a result, I was doing badly. And that's a very hard thing for me to overcome. And I think I finally got to the point where it's like, I don't care anymore. I'm just going to do what I want to do. But the thing that I try not to do it is when I'm working on my painting, if I walk over and look at their painting, I'm screwed. Because I'll say, oh, you know, I like the way they did that tree, or I like the way that light was, or that figure. And I'll go back and I'll start messing with my painting, and I'll mess it up, and I'll lose the original vision. So now when I'm out painting with other people, I try very hard not to look at theirs, because it influences me. And so I don't know. I mean, I've painted, you know, one of my great memories is I painted with some Russian masters. And in Russia, in the inland in Russia, I've been to Russia 3 times. I love it. The people are wonderful. You know, everything they talk about on TV, that's a whole nother thing. But the people, you know, they're deeply spiritual people. They love art. Everybody in Russia loves art. You know, I went to the opera or to the symphony with Nikolai Dubovik, who's the great Russian master from the Sarakov Institute in Moscow. And we walked in, he had his long coat draped over his shoulders, kind of like a movie star would. And we walked into the room, and the room erupted in applause, and they stood and they applauded as the two of us walked in, and he sat down, and everybody's looking at him like he's George Clooney or something. And that's how they look at artists. So I was able to spend just last year, I guess, or 2 years ago, I went inland into Russia after I took our art collector trip I took to Russia, and then I went inland on my own, took a train inland and met him and his son and some other painters, and we just painted in these old country villages, these old dashas in Russia. And, you know, and then we sit up at night, and they're pouring out the vodka, and I can't keep up. So I'm kind of like putting one over my shoulder every once in a while, you know, so not really, but the idea was that it was just such a rare experience to paint with them. And, you know, he would walk over and he would point to things. We couldn't communicate very well. His son was a translator, but he'd walk over and he'd point to something, and he'd point to something, and I'd get it, you know, oh, that's off. But I will tell you another story about him. He walked into my studio. He visited my home, and he walked into my studio, and I had about 30 paintings laying out, knowing he was coming. And he walked in, and he went, that one, that one, that one, and that one. And I said, what? What about those? He said, those were painted outdoors. The rest were painted from photographs. And he nailed it exactly. Every single one of them, he could tell which ones were outdoors and which were not. My eye was not trained at the time to be able to know the difference. Now I think I can.
And just switching a little bit from that, do you have any places that you've loved painting besides that, or bucket list places that you want to paint?
Well, I want to go back to Russia. I actually want to take a group back to Russia at some point. I take groups around the world sometimes. We took people to Cuba. That was a bucket list, and that was a lot of fun. I've done that twice. We took a group to Africa last year. We took we do a thing in the Adirondacks every summer for about 100 painters, and then we're doing Ghost Ranch where Georgia O'Keeffe lived this fall for about 100 people, which I'm really looking forward to that. I will, if you set me down in an alley and there are dumpsters there, I'll paint them. And it's the act of trying to find something beautiful and something that maybe isn't that really turns me on. Now, I love standing in front of Notre Dame in Paris and painting that too. I was painting there, and a bunch of kids walked up to me. They're smoking cigarettes, and they spoke English. They were French kids, and they said, "You really should quit painting. This is terrible." So, those are the hard moments to take. And I was out painting by myself, and this truck. I was out in the country, and this truck went by, and there were a bunch of redneck guys in the truck, and they're calling me. They're making slurs at me. I won't use the specifics. And they went down the road, and I could tell they were drunk. And I saw the taillights go on. I thought, oh, shoot, I better. So I just grabbed my easel and threw it in my car and took off, and they followed me. Finally, they stopped. But I thought, they're probably going to beat the crap out of me. And so, because they thought what I did was, in their words, they used a word a little harsher than sissy. But I think that, you got to be careful out there sometimes too.
Yeah. Well, I know that there's people here in this group today that will appreciate your dumpster story. I watched one of our painters being nearly crushed by the garbage truck in the dumpsters.
Oh no.
Alley here. Oh yeah, but it was a story to tell. It's a great story to tell.
Well, they all are filled with stories, and that's what's so wonderful about them. And that's why those little studies, you never want to give up. Even if they're crummy, I keep them.
That's right. I know we're coming to an end here, and there's so much more that we could talk to you about, but you have the Plein Air conference and expo coming up in San Francisco. I know that a few of our members are attending. What can they look forward to?
Well, I'm okay on time. I'm okay on time if you are. I don't know exactly how to articulate it. I mean, the people that have been all come and they said, this is so much different than I expected, and so much different than what your advertising and promotion talks about. It, it's so much richer, so much better. This Plein Air convention came out of a dream. I don't know if you ever read that or not, but I had this dream about being in a castle, and there was a big dinner table, and it was Leonardo da Vinci and I don't remember who the painters were, John Singer Sargent, all the regulars, and we're sitting around this table, and we're telling stories of art, and we're toasting each other and drinking wine, and this big long room, this castle, this table's got about 50 painters around it. And then after dinner, I said to one of the painters, I said, hey, let's set up and paint. And so everybody got their easels out, and everybody just started painting, and I'm walking around watching everybody paint. And that's where I got the idea for the Plein Air convention. I thought we have to do this. And it's a special moment in time because this is not something that I think can be pulled off forever. And so, my goal was to get the world's leading painters. They're different every time. I try not to repeat main painters each show. And so we have 5 stages. So we're going to be in downtown San Francisco in the Hilton downtown. It's a big convention facility, and we have 5 stages. So we have a great big stage with these big screen, giant HD screens, which is better than going to a workshop because you can see every detail of the brush. And you've got these painters on stage, and they're doing demos. You got demos all day long on 5 different stages. So you got that stage. You've got a stage, a watercolor artist. We have this year Joe Zabukvich, who is Zabukvich, I got it wrong, who is the world's best watercolor artist, I'm told, and I think probably is. And he's coming in from Australia. We've tried to get him for 8 years. We're putting him on the main stage, but we also have amazing lineup of watercolor artists who are teaching on our watercolor stage. And then we have a pastel stage. And then we have 2 other stages. One's called a demo stage, and we just put anything and everything on there that fits. You know, sometimes we try to do, just different kinds of things. Some of it's acrylic, some of it's gouache, some of it's just, one of them's teaching how to paint dogs. Sometimes we'll do still life or a portrait or something. And then we have a stage set up in the expo hall. The expo hall is about 40 or 50 art vendors and a lot of very plein air specific stuff. So stuff you won't find in the art stores, like the tripod-based easels, which you very rarely see in the art stores, and things that are plein air specific. We've got a big store that's got all of our stuff. So basically what we do, we start out the convention. We give the Plein Air Salon Awards. We do a couple Lifetime Achievement Awards. This year it's Albert Handel and also Joe Zabukvich. And then, we make some videos on them and show them. And then on stage for the opening, Zabukvich is going to do a demo, which is going to be amazing. And then we have this year, for the first time this has been done, I think, is we have 4 painters that are very different working on the same painting. So we're going to project an image, and it's not plein air painting, but it's, it's indoors, so we can't. But so we have Charlie Hunter, who does these dark monochrome things. And then to be opposite of that, we've got Shelby Keefe, who does these really bright, colorful paintings. She's from Milwaukee. Then we have Cynthia Rosen, who does these big, thick palette knife paintings. And then we have Larry Moore, who's very abstract. So they're all, Charlie Hunter's very tight. So they're all focusing on the same canvas, and they get 10 minutes on and off. And so they rotate, so it's going to be this big jumbled mess. It'll be fun. And then, a typical day, Art Marketing Boot Camp starts at 6:30 in the morning, and the room is packed. People want to know how to learn how to sell paintings. This year, I'm going to teach. I met a guy who sold $5 million worth of paintings last year. Basically, one guy by himself. He's got 2 helpers now, and he sold $5 million worth of paintings. And he told me exactly how he did it. So I'm going to reveal that and talk about that. I'm also going to do sessions on Instagram and some other things. And so we do art marketing. Then we have homeroom every day where everybody's in the room together. That's when I give away prizes. We make announcements, things like that. Last year, we have this spinning wheel where we give away prizes. And last year, the first person who came up spun the wheel and won a $25,000 trip to Africa. It was like, oh, man. So everybody in the room was like freaking out, including me, because I got to write the check. And then... And so then everybody goes off. So the oil people stay in the oil room, and the watercolor people go off to theirs. We break for lunch. We keep going in the afternoon. And then about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we all go painting together. And it's a sight to see, to be standing at, we'll be standing at the base of hopefully the base of the Golden Gate Bridge. And there's going to be 800 or 1,000 of us painting together. And it's like a part of history. And then, so we do that 4 days. The last day we're going up to wine country, and we're going to paint at a winery, but we're painting all around San Francisco. We've got Golden Gate Park. We've got the Golden Gate Bridge. We've got a place called Land's End, which is just beautiful trees and beautiful scenery. And then we go back and we have sessions at night. So at night we have critique sessions, and you can submit your paintings for critique. And we've got some famous painters who are doing critiques. We also have specialty sessions. So somebody might be doing a specialty session on how to paint trees or how to paint clouds or how to do something. And so we have stuff going all the time. And we rinse and repeat, do that for 4 days. And then the last day is all painting. We have a closing party because it's San Francisco where the hippie movement came from. We're going to do a closing hippie party. So everybody will bring their bell bottoms and their beads. And we'll have a DJ. We'll be playing 60s music and just, having a lot of fun with that. And everybody works really hard all week, but it's people come, sometimes they come alone, sometimes they're with friends, but they work really hard. And the goal of the thing is that you watch these people, you learn a technique, and then you go out that day and you practice that technique while you're outside. You're not there just to paint the Golden Gate Bridge. You're there to learn. And the idea is that if you learn a technique and you do it that day, you'll remember it. It'll stick with you. And that's really the reason we go out and painting. We could be indoors the whole time. And this year, we're doing something new that we've never done before. We've had a few people freaking out about San Francisco because, there's some publicity about the homeless issue. There are no homeless people that we saw in any of the places that we're going to paint. There are some in the downtown area, of course. And so for people who don't want to go out or they don't want to drive or they don't want to park, they don't want to navigate a big city, we're doing an indoor painting arena at the convention. So we'll have the big screens, we'll tear down the chairs, and we'll project the places that everybody else is painting. We'll project them. We have instructors that work with you. So we call them field painters. And these people essentially, they go around and they have big flags, and you have this thing that you can wave them down, and they say, hey, stop here, and they'll work with you. So I remember last year, the year before, this lady called me and she said, I can't believe it. She said, I'm standing there working on my painting and I'm frustrated and I can't figure it out. I haven't been painting for very long. And this guy walks up and he says, can I help you? And it's Kevin McPherson. And Kevin McPherson says, yeah, well, squint down, look at that. He said, where are your big shapes? And she said, well, they're not there. He said, just turn that into big shapes. It'll change everything. He stood there, showed her how to do it. She worked on it. She said it changed my life. It changed the way I paint forever. So we got 88 instructors so far who are out there working with you guys every day. So it's a blast. It's a blast.
Great. It sounds great. And I know that we probably have recruited a couple more people for you here because it just sounds great. But Eric, it's been a thrill to spend time with you. On behalf of the Plein Air Painters Chicago, thank you very much for all you do to create a culture for plein air and for artists and to support all of us in our work in plein air. Thank you.
Well, keep painting, everybody, and bring more people into painting. That's important. And Mary, you and I will talk. I'll put together, for everybody who's coming that's not registered yet, I'll put together a special Plein Air Chicago discount to give you guys a little bit of a break on the price because I'd like to get more people there.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Well, thanks for your time today, Eric.
Thank you. I appreciate this. Good interview.